and the innovative methodology that we have used about fuzzy cognitive maps. So thank you very much, Flavio, to stay today here, and you have the word.
Thank you. Okay. Oops. Okay, so I'll give an overview of, first of all, of the reason why we chose cognitive mapping applied to higher education. Everything starts from the mental models. So whenever we try to understand reality, the external reality, we automatically make a mental model out of what we are seeing and what we are interacting with. But this is basically unconscious. So the mental model is the thing that allows us to filter and to communicate what we are understanding about the external reality. So for example, if we have a planet, every one of us knows exactly what a planet is, but each one of us will understand it differently. And so it is often useful to represent these mental models. So there are different ways of representing models, and this representation enables us to communicate with the others, and even to improve our model, to know what are our limits in knowledge, our biases, the biases of the others, and so on. And also making scenarios. So how can this model evolve under certain circumstances, etc. So this is a very simple representation of a mental model. It's basically made of nodes, which are the factors composing the different parts of the reality, and links the factor. That could be quantitative links, qualitative links, and so on. It could be of different kinds. This, for example, is a mind map. It's one of the simplest example of mental models. And as you can see, there are basically the links are basically neutral. So there are no numbers or sentences. And this is useful, especially when we use it for ourselves. So if I pass this model on to somebody else, he will not necessarily understand what I was doing, but this will be useful for myself, for remembering what my reasoning was, etc. Another type of cognitive mental model or cognitive map is the concept map, which is rather different in the sense that the links are always have a value, which is a logical connection. It is a sentence. So each link is a sentence, and each part of this model, of this map, can be understood as a simple sentence, as a logical connection. So in this case, for example, this is the description of a car. If I pass this model to somebody else, he will probably be able to understand what I am explaining. So he will read the map and understand how a car is made. So after we have represented our models, we can also share it with others. And this is very important because it can improve communication, it can reduce communication barriers, and it can help, for example, transdisciplinary work. And this is exactly what we did in the PECUS project. So we can make a group of people, and we can start choosing a topic and making a map out of it. So this map will be the representation of what all these people know about or have experienced about this specific situation. And in the end, so we will have started with our mental model of the planet. We will have represented our mental model. And in the end, after a group exercise, after having shared this model with the others, our model will be different from the beginning. It will be more complex, it will have more links, it will have more factors, etc. And this change of model is exactly when we are learning new things. So changing our mental model means getting new knowledge. Of course, this is a different way of learning things. It's not like rote learning or learning by memorization, which is a traditional way of learning, but it is a more dynamic way of learning, and this is what our project was about. Why fuzzy? These maps are called fuzzy cognitive maps because they are cognitive maps. They are fuzzy because they use common language, so they are basically imprecise. They don't give exact numbers. And the connections also are expressed in terms of percentages. So they're not crisp numbers. They are like percentages. They're like estimates of how one factor is linked to another. And also they allow to understand the complexity of the environment because they allow you to be imprecise, so to experiment with different scenarios, with different estimates, and to combine the knowledge of many different people. Whereas let's say the classical set are expressed in terms of crisp numbers or Boolean values, the fuzzy sets are expressed in terms of percentages. Okay, the links between the factors are expressed in terms of a percentage. So this factor is positively linked to this other one in, let's say, 60% positive way or 40% negative, and so on. These are some examples. This is an old map. This is a fuzzy map. And as you can see, the connections are characterized by plus or minus signs. So we can say that, for example, international police interdiction is negatively linked to corruption. That means that if you have more police interdiction, you will presumably have less corruption, but it doesn't say how much. In this other case, you have negative and positive values and also little sentences such as a little positive or very much negative and so on. The method that we used is giving a percentage or a decimal value. So meaning that each of these factors is connected to the other one, and it is a causal connection. So it is each factor is proportionally connected to the other, either inversely or directly. And as you can see here, only the links have values, but not the factors. The factors are, in the beginning, they're neutral. Then in the second part of the exercise, you can start making scenarios. That means that if you assign a value to one or more of the factors, automatically the whole map will change, because one single factor can have an influence on all the others, either directly or indirectly. And this is what the tool that we use, which is called Mental Modeler, allows you to do automatically. These are some pictures of our workshop in Valencia. So we had, like, if I remember well, 50 students. We divided them into 3 groups, and each group were divided into small subgroups of 3 or 4 persons, and each of them made a map out of a specific topic. And then in the end, each map was discussed in front of the others. One of the maps was chosen and then collectively improved. And then at the last session, in the last day, the map was illustrated to all the other groups and discussed all together. So as you can see, it is an iterative way of building the map and, learning new knowledge each time. This is like an example of one of the maps made by the students. As you can see, there are positive or negative values in the links. The colors illustrate whether the links are negative or positive, and the width of the arrows illustrate the value that we have given to the single connection. And this is the scenario tool after you have started to make the map. As you can see here, you have values applied only to the links, but here you can apply some values also to some of the factors and see how all the other factors will change by changing that one specific factor. So it is just, I would say, a semi-quantitative method to understand how a system could presumably change under certain circumstances. This is the very general methodology that we choose. So in the beginning, you assign a topic. You have to be very careful of assigning a topic. It should be not too generic, but not too specific at the same time. Then you start discussing on the variables or the factors or the elements that make up this topic. You start making a list of the elements. Then you just eliminate the duplicates, and then you start making the mapping. You start making the map of these using all these values that you have selected. After that, you can also, this is very interesting, even if it's a bit time consuming, you can also merge the different maps of the different groups. So if you start from the same values, each group makes a different map, and then you can merge them together. So you get to have a social map, which is a representation of all the experiences of the whole group. And then you can make a final discussion about the outcome that you've gotten. The mapping part, in turn, is divided into these two phases, but these two phases of building the map and checking the scenarios is like, it turned out to be, it is much better if it's conceived as an iterative progression. So you start making the map, then you pass on to the scenarios, and the scenarios allowed you to understand if you have made some mistakes in the map, or if the results that you are getting are somehow unexpected. So you can go back to the map and correct some of your values, some of your factors, or you can even understand that your assumptions that you started with were completely wrong. So that's exactly where you're learning that you had some biases about a specific topic, for example. These are some of the applications that were made by some of the students after our workshop, but I think that Francesco will tell you more about this. This was a research by a PhD candidate in Sweden about the perception of landscape, and she's been using fuzzy cognitive maps to understand the perception of landscape by the stakeholders. This is, I would say, radically different. This is about a research about zonification, and it's very different from what we made, but also this person, which works at the University of Newcastle, is using fuzzy cognitive maps to in a particular step of this research. So we are happy that in any case this tool has been used in other circumstances. I'll finish with some, I would say, keywords that you can find in the end of our guidelines that you can download from the PECUS website. The most important word, of course, is fuzzy. We somehow realized that fuzzy is not only, we call it fuzzy not only because the values that you assign to the links are fuzzy, but actually the method itself that we are using is fuzzy, because each of the teacher realizes while tutoring these students, and even the students realize that the exercise itself that they are doing is fuzzy, because they don't know where they're going. So we know where we're starting, but we don't know exactly where we're going. And we don't have to expect that we know exactly what we're doing. So in that sense, the exercise is fuzzy. And that's actually its strength, in my opinion. Maiutics is what I like the most of this tool, because, as I was saying before, it is not about standard learning, top-bottom approach. I give you, I provide you as a teacher, I provide my knowledge to the students, but rather the students are I help the students to extract the knowledge from themselves, so from what they already know, from what they might know, from what they learn from the others, and so on. So this is the most important aspect, in my opinion, about fuzzy cognitive mapping, and cognitive mapping in general, I would say. Interventionism, I use this word because somehow some of the tutors in our workshop in Valencia, in the beginning, they didn't know exactly how much to intervene in the work by the students. So, and this is a balance that you have to reach. So if you intervene too much, you start the exercise won't be that effective in the sense of, maiutics and fuzziness. If you don't intervene too much, you risk that the students will get lost because they make some mistakes in the application of the tool. So you have just to understand how much to intervene. That's another funny part of the exercise on the part of of the tutors. Comfort zone is something that the students are, participants making a map are helped to leave when making a map, because usually if you're asked to give crisp numbers or scientific results, maybe you can feel a bit shy. But if you're asked to give estimates or fuzzy numbers or opinions, you are helped to speak up. So even if you're not, you're a shy person, this tool helps you to speak more and to intervene more in the exercise and to express your opinion. Iteration is what I was talking about before, is that it is an iterative process. So you start making the map, then you go to the scenario, you understand that maybe there's something wrong in the map, so you go back to the map, and then you go back to the scenario again. And this is also very interesting. And the students understood that that was the method by themselves. Nobody told them, well, just go to the scenario before. Actually, I learned this from the student, because I was used to make the map and then the scenarios, but they immediately understood that the scenario was in itself a tool to improve the map. A medium is, comes from a comment by one of the students from Newcastle, that she said that the tool was a medium, in itself a medium to think. So they used the tool to improve their thinking, because as far as they were just listing concepts, they weren't going anywhere. But as soon as they started the mapping, she had the feeling that the things sped up immediately. So the mapping in itself was an effective tool to help them think about that specific topic. Scale is more about the method. You have to be very careful to understand that you cannot mix elements that have very different scales. One typical example is climate change. Many students were using the factor of climate change and putting it into the map, and then they realized that it didn't work very well, because you cannot really affect climate change starting from the local level. So either if you want to use climate change as a factor inside the map, either you put it in the map, but you just use outwards connection. I mean, the other factors cannot influence climate change, but only climate change can influence the other factor, or you just leave it outside of the map. So this is very important. When you start the exercises, the teacher must be very careful to explain to the students what are the relative scales of the factors and what factors to use and what to use not. Equilibrium is about another thing to understand is that a cognitive map is never really concluded, because you can actually keep improving it potentially in a limited way. But there is one specific point when you understand that any further improvement is marginal. So that is the exact point where the map has reached an equilibrium, because everybody has spoken, everybody has expressed their opinion, and there's not many improvements that you can make. So at that point you can stop, and you can be, you can decide that the map is okay and not go on. Purpose, well, it's connected to all the other keywords. As I was saying, with the first keyword, since the method is fuzzy, the purpose itself is fuzzy. The purpose is learning new things, but don't expect that you have a specific purpose to obtain. And then it happens very often that the students at the beginning are very, very skeptical, because they say, well, it happened to me, for example, when I asked my colleagues in Rome to dedicate one day to a mapping exercise for this project, and we made a video out of it that you can find on our YouTube channel. And when they arrived in the morning, they were saying like, "Oh, why are we doing this? It's so useless and boring." I could read it from their faces, but in the end, they were really enthusiastic about the tool. So I interviewed them, and you can see the interviews in the video. And they were enthusiastic for different reasons, because they realized that you could apply the tool in different ways. Well, this is just an example of one of the last maps that we did in our Valencia meeting. I will not, well, maybe I have some time. This is just one way to make a map. Of course, there are many different ways. In this case, this was a map where the people who did it decided to put the main topics of the map in the middle of the map. So the main topics are preservation of traditional landscape connected to pastoralism, preservation of traditional sheep farming, and the preservation of the traditional infrastructure that was connected to this kind of landscape. In this case, they divided the factors negatively affecting these three factors on the one side and the factors positively affecting them on the other side. So they just divided, visually and graphically, with different colors. And then, as you can see, the factors that are in the middle don't have any inward connections. They only, it's the opposite. They are influenced by all the other factors, but they don't really influence the other factors because we are talking about what happens to these factors, starting from all the others. So this is just an example to see how you have to, in the beginning, you have to understand how you want to develop this map. And then you can go on and see what happens, and then you can develop scenarios, and different scenarios were developed about this map. And in the end, it proved to be very, very dense, with many connections, and this was one of the final outcomes of our last exercise. So that's it. Thank you. We have actually 10 more minutes, so if you have questions, I think we have time.
It's working. Okay. It's always very kind of strange for me that this is like the third or fourth time that we are working with cognitive mapping, and it's always the same feeling. The first time that we work with it, it's like, what is this for? This tool is like, I don't know, I would like to know, we have talked about this a couple of times, but it's very interesting how you start and then how you finish, When you start, it's like, but this is a really kind of full, it doesn't make that much sense. And then when you carry on, exchange information with the rest of your the participants of the workshop or whatever, it's like the interest and the possibilities and the potential of the actual tool just grows in people. You can see that through the process. By the fifth, I think we need 5 days for each, or at least 4 days for the workshop, because if it finishes in the second day, it's like, no, this is not really my tool. And then if actually it lasts for 4 days, people get really into it, and it's like, for me, it's like, at the beginning, it was mainly because I understand that I was coming from where I was coming, from my background, from my knowledge, from my concepts, from my tools, and it allowed me to actually kind of step back and look the topic in a completely different way, and being able to share, to have a conversation, not based on my previous knowledge, but on a different scenario, if you can say it like that. I don't know, I just wanted to share this kind of idea because it's really, really funny. When you have done it a couple of times, it's like you see people at the beginning, the first day, like looking like really weird tool. And then by the end of the process, they are really into it. And Francesco was telling us the other day, yesterday, actually, the other day, so many things have happened since then, that some students that were very critical, actually, from Newcastle during the workshop, they were very, very critical, which was really good because they were kind of putting us in trouble, no? And then they actually, 4 of them or 5 of them have actually included in their work, in the academic work. So I don't know, it was something I wanted to share, but at the same time, what's your idea? Why do you think that happens? Or any of any of the colleagues from the different universities, which is the main, you actually wrote that list of reasons, let's say, but why do you think is the main reason for it? Why we are so skeptical at the beginning?
I think it's basically because it's fuzzy. So, so that's I was saying about the method. The method is fuzzy, and so it is not very clear in the beginning what it is for. But that's a good part about it. And we did have some negative comments, and in particular, I remember one that she was saying, "Well, this is not at all about research. It's not doesn't work." And my answer would be, it is not a tool for research. That has to be clear. So because it is not a quantitative tool at all. It doesn't pretend to give you scientific answers because it is fuzzy. So, but it can be used at some steps of your research when you have to involve stakeholders to see what their opinions are, to just to discuss about scenarios. So it's just something in the middle. It's not an answer, a specific answer for a specific problem that you have, but you can include it in, like, for example, in the sonification research. It has been included at a specific point in the research. In the research in Sweden, the same thing. So you have to be aware of what it is for, and then use it when appropriate, of course.
Yes, I did have some at the beginning of the workshop that we organized in Newcastle, and it was, I think, different from other local events that were organized by other partners, because most of the participants were postgraduate students or PhD students. So they were coming to the workshop with a specific idea of what they wanted to do with this tool. And the main question that some of them asked me was like, how do you decide what value you assign to a specific relationship? And they didn't understand they didn't appreciate my answer, which was, it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. So you just find like a value that you think is vaguely, relevant or appropriate for the relationship, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is the actual relationship and the variability of this relationship. But they say, well, but this is all like speculative then. Yes, it is, but it's not the point. It took them some time to, of course, it's not for everyone, in the sense that for some people, especially if they're doing research, for example, a PhD research, it might not be the most appropriate tool. But a lot of participants, a lot of students realized that it was quite useful not only to collaborate or to interact with other with participants or other people that we're working with, but also to develop new ideas.
Yes.
So, but they all started with the idea of, I'm going to have a tool that provides me with a number. And this number is the answer to all my problems. But it's not like that. And what I did when I was like trying to convince them that, or rather trying to explain why it was not a big deal, I told them that it's like a model. It's like a computational model. Even if you parameterize the model in a way that is not exactly correct, it doesn't really matter, because what matters within a model are the relationships. And then, of course, the result, you can tweak the different parameters, right? And you can see how the outcome of the model varies, but what really matters is how you create a relationship rather than how you decide what parameters to use. It's the same for fuzzy cognitive mapping. It was quite difficult to pass that message to some of the students.
I would like to say that I think that it's very different for undergraduate student, master student, and PhD student, because the level is completely different for them, the level of knowledge. But I think also that for the numbers, it was a way that they say, okay, if we don't have numbers, it's not a model, it's a problem for them. And for the Andorra landscape of transhumance, the project that we were doing, here we have decided to carry out other fuzzy methods, that is Delphi methodology. So the number we have asked 7 different experts in the field, and they gave the number. So even Delphi don't look to have the same number for 7 different experts. The idea is to have different opinions, different numbers, different variables. This is the idea. I think that nowadays in the project, in the European project, Spanish and regional here in Andalusia, they ask interdisciplinary opinions. They are how to work with different fields, and this is a very interesting way to work with different fields. Because in other way, at the end, I come from the chemist. I love numbers. I have to say that. But here I can understand the opinion of the archaeologists, anthropologists, of the geographers. So it's a way to understand the problem. It's a way to go on and to take decision with the opinions. And this is very important. Perhaps you say that it's not important for research, but I think that it's important for students, for education, but also for research.
No,
I look
it is, but you just have to know when, at what point to use it. That was
okay. So I think that all of us have learned. I say at the beginning that I have learned too much, but I think that Fuzzy Map could be the future of a lot of students here in the University Pablo de Olavide, because they open their mind with this. So I think it was really interesting in this sense.